Thanks for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. My name is James Serra. I'm a data and AI solution architect at Microsoft. I've been here 12, maybe 13 years now. I've always been in pre-sales, and in my current role, well, almost always in pre-sales. In my current role, I work on, everybody at Microsoft is in different industries, and mine is the global technology sales for Japan. So companies like Mazda and banks like SMBC and Mizuho and other, mostly automotive companies from Japan is what I focus on. I've been doing this for quite a long time. It's actually over 40 years now. And over those years, I've had a lot of different roles, acquired a lot of knowledge, and put that knowledge into a book called Deciphering Data Architectures. And if for those of you who stayed at the end, I'll tell you about a free way to get a copy of my book. This particular topic came up, I want to say maybe 3.5 years ago, when ChatGPT first came out. And of course, now it's all the rage, and rightfully so. I still find a lot of customers are confused about what do you mean by GenAI? And so I'll start off this by level setting with some definitions of GenAI, and then we'll get into some demos. One will be showing Copilot in Excel. I have demoed something similar with semi-structured data, which Excel is, within ChatGPT itself, and then there's ChatGPT's got an add-on for Excel, but in this one I'm going to go through the Copilot in Excel. And then I'll demo Microsoft Fabric data agents, and that'll work on structured data. And then I'll talk about some industry use cases, and then we'll hit a little bit of architectures. Feel free to drop comments in the chat. I'll be paying attention as we go along. I may pause at times for questions. I'm going to try to keep this to a little over an hour because some of you may know there's an 8 o'clock soccer game on, USA and Belgium. That's exciting to watch. Big soccer fan. I've been coaching soccer for 25 years, and I'm looking forward to this match.
And James, I'm gonna monitor the chat window, and I'll let you know.
Okay, and feel free to ask some soccer questions if you want. No, just kidding. So the data platform, what I've worked on pretty much my whole career, and this GenAI world are colliding. It used to be GenAI was all about text data, and now it's got into the last few years semi-structured data and structured data, and not just unstructured data, which is text. And this is changing everything on there, and we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg with the capabilities of GenAI. And at Microsoft, it's GenAI is in everything we do now. All interactions with customers, all our manual tasks that are now automated or mostly automated on there. It's just really overtaken in a way I haven't seen before. As much as, if not more than, when the internet first came around. We got used to web browsers, and before that, some of you may remember, we didn't have computers, desktop computers, and how that revolutionized everything. And now GenAI is doing that. So level set about some GenAI definitions. Question you may have is GenAI magic? Sometimes I think it is. The way it works, I'm just fascinated, especially if you use ChatGPT or Copilot and you ask it a question and you see it thinking, and it's really amazing where it shows you how it's thinking, and it looks like a human is thinking on that. It's pretty incredible. So some definitions. AI, it's been around for quite a long time, probably about 30 years, and it's an umbrella name for a lot of different products or other approaches. Think of it as it's just computational systems and models that perform tasks that usually require human intelligence, now are done by AI. Now, AI used to be, when you said AI, you were talking about machine learning. That's still around, it's still valuable, but GenAI has overtaken everything, and GenAI is just a subset of AI. So if somebody says, I want to talk about AI, you have to be, don't just assume it's GenAI, it could be other aspects of AI. But the GenAI, it's called generative AI because it's generating new content. Unlike machine learning, which doesn't generate new context. GenAI not only generates new text, but it could be images that you see now and audio, and you've probably seen a lot of the fake audio or video that's going around now. So it got really good with images a couple of years ago, and now with audio and video. And I should mention video on here. It's super impressive. Sometimes you can't tell the video is if it's real or not. And it does behind the scenes. It uses this neural networks. It's the way the human brain thinks is the way GenAI behind the scenes is thinking, and it learns over time. Not so much from what questions you were asking, but rather these new machine learning models, these large language models are being trained and improved over time. And those large language models are what GenAI was all about early on. And the large language models, which are essentially made up of an entire internet, among other things, is changed over the past few years in that there are smaller language models now, and usually to save costs. There are models that are specific for generating images or video on that. So there's tons of different models out there, and they're constantly getting updated. It's amazing. If you look at ChatGPT, they're on 5.5, and it's like every other week they're coming out with a new version. And even within the model, they come up with new iterations of ways to use it in there. It's really incredible. But at a high level, you can think of a large language model as just a super smart autocomplete on steroids. It's just guessing the next word on that. And if you get behind the scenes, you realize, oh, it's not really magic. It's just an autocomplete that's extremely sophisticated. And we still have the machine learning. So that still could be useful in certain situations. Think of it as if you're trying to predict, say, if a customer would leave your bank. If you look at all the information that that bank has of a person's checking account and savings account and the withdrawals and the amounts, you could look at that and come up with a probability that they're going to leave the bank, because maybe if people are going to leave, their account gets near zero or they make more transactions. And machine learning models can still work very well on predicting the chance of, say, somebody leaving a bank, and they would give you a percentage on that. And as a bank owner, you may say, well, anybody who's predicted to leave that's over 75%, I'm going to give them some incentive to stay. And so you're being proactive instead of reactive. It's not generating any new text. It's just generating a prediction on that. And GenAI has gotten pretty good at that, but not near the level of sophistication machine learning models come in there. So there still may be times where it may be better to do machine learning than GenAI. And I call the machine learning the classic AI. OpenAI is only been around 11 years, and that it was the first company to create a popular bot, which was ChatGPT. So it's just using generative AI and putting a bot in front of it where you can ask questions. And that bot called ChatGPT, and of course now with Microsoft we have Copilot, is on top of usually a large language model, and that's only been around for not even 4 years now. It's crazy how fast this is propagated on that. So OpenAI being a company that's about to go public, they've delayed it, but in a few months it'd probably be public in there. And Microsoft has invested in OpenAI from the beginning. And ChatGPT and both Copilot underneath the covers use similar models. You can change those. If you ever go into ChatGPT or Copilot, you have an option to change the large language model or small language model you're using, but it's a lot of overlap between the two products. And then prompt engineering is a very big important part of everything to do with GenAI. It's how good your question is. And if you use ChatGPT or Copilot for a while, you've realized the answers can be wrong, but competently wrong. So the way to reduce that is by having better questions. And that's what's called prompt engineering. So it's if you ever have a chance to take a class on that, I would highly recommend it because it talks about how you can design a question to give you a better answer, to be more accurate, how you can then ask ChatGPT or Copilot to improve your prompt. So next time it doesn't give the same mistakes on there. It's really a science in itself on there. So to take advantage of learning more about prompt engineering. They publicized what ChatGPT 3 was on there. Now we're on 5.5. I don't know what additional things they've trained it on, but you can imagine it's still using what's listed here and then some in there. ChatGPT 3 was trained on the Common Crawl, which is essentially the entire internet. And then it's taken books that were digitalized to train on it. Wikipedia, Reddit, all of that is incorporated into ChatGPT 3 in there. And that is what it uses to help make autocomplete. So the interesting part of that is it's only going to be as smart as the internet. Fortunately, on the internet, I would say 99.99% of the sites say the Earth is round. So there's a 99.99% chance you're going to get an answer saying that the Earth is round. But it could come up in a very rare instance and hallucinate and come up with the wrong answer, even if not prompted incorrectly. And you always have to keep that in mind in there. So there's no way to make it 100% accurate. And we'll see that when we get a demo, because I don't quite know what it's going to display for certain, because sometimes it changes, because it's non-deterministic, meaning you can ask the same question and get a different answer. Now, some data definitions is here. Is think of unstructured data, the ability to generate text, especially with GenAI. It could use PDF documents, text, Word documents on there, emails, and all that could be used on GenAI. I call it old school, although it's used all the time now. But we have new types of data. That includes semi-structured data. Think of tables that are sitting in a CSV or Parquet file, and there it could be an Excel file. And this is what I'll demo today. I'll use it on semi-structured data. And then the newer one is structured data. Think of tables that are sitting in a relational database like SQL Server or Oracle. And in Microsoft Fabric with data agents, that is working on structured data sitting in a warehouse or a lakehouse. And then, of course, we have binary that we're not talking about here. Model definitions, you may have heard of, called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. And that is the idea of you create a model and you want to improve it. Maybe I want to get newer stuff on the internet, or I have a bunch of documents that are internal to my company that are not out on the internet, and I want to send that to I want to take the large language model and this additional information when somebody asks a question to give them a better answer. I mean, imagine if they ask a question on refrigerators and it gets what's on the internet, but there's a bunch of refrigerator documents, and I work for a company that sells refrigerators that you want to use to get a better answer. Maybe you have a bot that the customer is using to ask questions. You can supplement that in real time, and that's called the RAG method, as opposed to fine-tuning, which means taking a model and then rebuilding the model with this new information. So you're creating a new model. There's trade-offs to both of these approaches. When you use something like ChatGPT, it's using the RAG, it's fine-tuned something over there, but the model you're using may be dated. It may have been created, say, 2 months ago. So anything on the internet in those 2 months is not going to have. If you think of a question such as, tell me how the Yankees did yesterday in the Major League Baseball, the model's not going to have that because it's too new. So it'll go out, ChatGPT, and scan the internet and find the scores and supplement the model with those scores. And that's called the RAG methodology. So if you look at that in the pretty pictures here on the left is the full fine tuning. It's training the model all over again, taking, say, an extra a pre-existing large language model, that's the baseline, and then a bunch of documents, and then it creates a new model. The RAG methodology here is sending those additional documents on the fly. So everything's got trade-offs in here. You can think of fine-tuning as costly because it's got to build a whole new model, and that could take time. And as soon as it's published, it's already outdated on there. If you think of ChatGPT 5.5, 5.6, those are fine-tuning new models. The RAG gives you the real time, but the trade-off is that it could be more costly because you're sending this information each time, and that could use more tokens and then cause more cost. It could be slower in response times because it's got to look at more information, and it could not be as accurate because the fine-tuning, you can train it and make sure all the new stuff is very accurate, where the RAG, it goes out and pulls the scores, but maybe it pulled the wrong scores on that, and there's no way of knowing. The picture, if you look in Azure, is it takes a front end, it could be an application or a bot, and then it takes the question and it goes out and does what's called a vector search. The idea being it's if I'm going to use the RAG and I'm going to supplement it, I could have thousands of documents. I don't want to send thousands of documents along with the question each time. So what the vector search does is it takes those documents and it chunks them into smaller pieces, puts them in a vector search engine, like SQL Server 2025 has it in there, and it indexes. And so when somebody asks a question, it could be about the Yankees. It's going to go and find all the documents through the index that talk about the Yankees and just send over specific chunks of the documents that are related to the Yankees over using the RAG methodology on there. So greatly reducing the time and the performance issues on there. So if you hear about vector search, that's what it is. It's just indexed a bunch of document pieces that allow it to pull out the appropriate ones instead of using everything. That vector index could be made up of all, on the far right here, of all types of documents, even PowerPoint. It could incorporate all that using the AI document intelligence in Azure, where it reads the documents and pulls out all information on there. And so that's how it works in Azure. All right, like I said, mentioned, if you have any questions along the way, just pop them in the chat.
No
We're
questions,
going to
no
talk
questions.
about, okay, thanks. Today is we're going to talk about using GenAI on semi-structured and structured data related to conversational querying, where we're just asking questions and getting answers, and then taking that data and enriching it, cleaning it, supplementing it with other data, looking up other information, and that's the focus of the two demos I'm going to show you. Now, there's a lot of things you can do with GenAI. And I find a lot of people using it for sample data creation. Instead of trying to find a sample data set, you can just go in there and say, give me 1 million rows that I would typically find in an HR department for Microsoft. And it creates all this fake data on there. You can use it to summarize data. You can use it to say, find some trends in this data. You can use it for forecasting prediction. Again, not as good as the classic AI, the machine learning model in there, but it can still do that. What if analytics? Help me find anomalies in this data and use some product service recommendations. Another area that's more in line with the classic AI, but GenAI has gotten much better on that. And then I've seen even help it to me map fields. If I'm creating ETL and I want to know what fields to map, help me figure that out. Or master data management, or help me create semantic models. Now, if you've seen some of the new stuff that and maybe you're going to demo it, is in the Microsoft build, is you can now have it build semantic models and Power BI reports and all this other stuff in there. So a lot of things that GenAI can do, but since we only have a little over an hour, I'm just focusing on the two in bold here. So Copilot in Excel, that's the first demo on here. And let me pull that over here. Let me go into my demo screen here, and I'm going to start with a blank Excel notebook. I turned on the auto save here in the top left. if you don't turn that on, it won't work right. It will tell you it can't answer questions. So turn it on, and then you simply start in the bottom right here. You see I have this, and they keep switching this around. Who knows what it's going to be tomorrow? But right now it's in the bottom right, and I click this, and I essentially have a Copilot bot front end that I'm going to use to build out my spreadsheet. Now, to have Copilot in Excel, you have to have certain licenses on there. So if you don't seen it, that means your company hasn't bought a license, and pressure them to do it. So, but that's, people get confused because they don't see that, and it's just because you have to buy a license for your company, and that'll allow Copilot to be in Excel and Word and Outlook and everything else, and PowerPoint and everything else. So as I'm going through this demo, think about how much time this would take if I tried to do this manually on here. I'm a big movie buff, and I like to watch movies pretty much every night. And when I was deciding, and this is kind of why I first used Copilot inside Excel, is what kind of movies to watch. So my thought was, I want to look at all the Academy Award winning movies here. So I simply go to Copilot and say, go look it up, and then populate the spreadsheet with all the Academy Award winners movies for Best Picture. And I want the year and the movie name to sit in the first two columns on there. And this is prompt engineering. I said, don't look at internal data sources, because at one time it found that I had asked this question before, and I found an Excel spreadsheet. So pretty smart, I just pulled it from that. But for this demo, I want to show it where it's going to go outside of what it already had on that. And then I have a sort in there. And you can see here where it's thinking. This is what's pretty crazy. And this is always different. And it tells you where it found it. And you can click on sources here, and this is usually different each time. I haven't seen this last one before, but I've seen the other two before. And here we go. We have the year and the movie title name in there. And you can imagine if I wanted to say, give me all the movies that have been nominated, and put it on there, and how long that would take to do something manually. Okay, great. So this is a good start, but I want to supplement this. I'm going to figure out what movies I want to watch, and I want to know the genre of these movies. So again, you ask that question on here, and it's thinking, and it's going to go populate it. And the question I have is, can you choose what model to use? No, that's secret on that. There's been talk that they may open it up. Now you can choose let me rephrase that. You can choose a few models. There's been talk about opening it up to many more models, but right now there's just 3 on that. So they just added these other 2. It used to be only 5 or ChatGPT, but now they've added a couple months ago, they added some of the Claude stuff in there. So right now there's just 3. So if you look at this auto, this right here is where you can select which model to use. Automatically select the best one. I don't really know how it figures out which one's the best one. It tends to be certain questions, maybe more math related questions would be more by Claude. I'm just guessing, but right now there's only 3 models. So thanks for that question. So the genre came up, and it picked the genre on here. If I want to know where did they get that genre from, you can look on here. Now, what you could do too with prompt engineering is, if you find it's using a source that's not very accurate, you can tell it, use something from Wikipedia, use something from IMDb, don't use this source on here. And so you can improve the accuracy of results if you know enough that it picked a site that is not very accurate, or I happen to know a site that's great, and you tell it to go and use that. Now here's where I can start getting into cleaning or changing the data on here. I may say, well, I don't like the word comedy, I like the word funny. And I'm telling it to go and replace that label. And it did that. And it highlighted the ones that changed here. So this gets part of the cleaning of the data on here. I could say, this is a good start, but I really would like a description of the movie. And so it goes out and it grabs this. And there's a lot of I'll say here, this could be time consuming if you have a lot of rows, but since I only have 99, 98, it goes pretty fast on here. I've been doing this for about 6 months and it's improved a lot the accuracy, because along the way you may find sometimes it misses a movie, especially the one from last year. It could have the wrong genre on here. And then as we get into other aspects of this, especially when we tell it to go look up the scores of these movies in there, it could be wrong on that. So you always got to keep that in mind, which is a pain, because how do you know it's even wrong? Maybe you spot check and you find on IMDb it had wrong ones on there because something doesn't look right visually checking. When I did it 6 months ago, a lot of it was wrong, but now the last few times it's almost 100% accurate on there. So I don't know what changed. It was using the same model, but it good. It's better, right? Let me try another one here to give an example of how you can improve this. Is you can, in this case, I want to say, tell me the leader, actor, and actresses. And if you're not quite sure what I mean, ask me qualifying questions. And you can put this on any of the lines. In order to prove the accuracy, this is part of prompt engineering and I do this all the time. I always say, ask me any clarifying questions on that. And otherwise it'll assume things. So in this case, it came back and say, well, should I get the top male or female in there, or only the Oscar winning ones in there? And then it has 2 questions in there. And if I don't find it, or it's not clear, what should I use on there? This is great. Otherwise, it would assume, and when I did this before and it wouldn't ask qualifying questions on there, it would sometimes come up and it picked the actors or actresses only if they were well known, and it kind of missed other ones in there. And so it did some quirky things on there. And that's why I now say, ask me the clarifying questions and then improve the accuracy. All right, so a question, how do the modules know about internal sources? And you answered right, it's internal. So the cool thing about Copilot, and if I pull it up here, you may have this Microsoft 365 for your office. It has this work IQ and choose some models on here, and I could turn off work IQ. If I choose work IQ, it's going to look through my OneDrive. If I turn it off, it's only going to use stuff from the external on here. And that OneDrive, so any Excel or PowerPoint, it's going to go and use that, or my emails, or my Teams messages on that. So it's really cool stuff, this work IQ, if you're not familiar with it. But Excel will go and look through your OneDrive unless you tell it not to. Sometimes at the beginning, you can just say, I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. Don't use any internal sources for your answers. All right, so.
And that will be
thanks.
not just your personal OneDrive, but everything you have access to, right, James?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for clarifying on that. So you'll be surprised at your results. Your results, say James, may come up in other people asking questions because I put it on my OneDrive and I didn't make it sensitive. Like up here, you can see the sensitivity of all these. And if I make it like confidential, it won't be used. But in this case, it's general. And I've been surprised that, I'll tell you a little story here. At Microsoft, we being pre-sales people in my role, were looking for information on some changes Microsoft were going to come out in the product direction. And we went to ChatGPT, and I will often do that to say, hey, what's going to happen with this product? And it will go through the OneDrive of people and come up, and I'll find out information that's not been announced. And that's the way I can find out that information without having to go to the product group, is because they put stuff in OneDrive. Now, one time the story was they didn't mark it confidential, and so people at Microsoft got information that they shouldn't have. And the product group was like, hey, that's not official yet. Make sure you don't even tell it to customers on NDA. And I bring it up because you have to remember, if have Copilot 365, that people may be scanning your local OneDrive, and getting information about you. So if you put personal information in there, that can get out. Now there's purview and things that could block all that, but if your company doesn't set it up right and you just start dumping personal information in there, it may come out in somebody's Copilot. So a good point to bring up. All right, so you came back and you see it looked like this is accurate with the leading actor and actresses on here. And so you can imagine I keep going on and on about this. And to not go through everything, I'll show you what I completed before. Let me make that a little bigger. I went through and also asked it for things like the worldwide gross, the ratings from IMDb, Metascore, user score, tomato meter, and popcorn meeting. And this is all the things I pulled out of here. And one of the last things I asked it was, I want a personalized rating from 1 to 10, taking all those other ratings, and I personally want all of them treated equally. And then I also prefer dramas and biography, and I don't really care about box office numbers. And I value consensus, where everybody, with the critics and the audiences, agree. So you can create whatever prompt you want for this to come up with your own movie, and then highlighting the top ones. And this was great when I sat down and say what movies I think I would like, and boom, here they are. And imagine trying to do all this manually. I mean, looking up all this stuff could take forever on this. So this was really awesome. And then also, let me go back to here is I don't have to always say I want this in a column in a spreadsheet. I can just go in there and say, and tell it that I want, for example, the top 10 movies based on worldwide gross using today's dollars. Try to guess what that is as it's coming up there. And I don't want this added to the spreadsheet. I just want my own internal knowledge in here. So here it goes. It's looking for all this stuff and then converting it to today's dollars. And surprisingly, the one, if it comes up with the same answer as I said before, was Gone with the Wind. Has made the most money based on today's dollars, of course, on that. And you can see it thinking. This is really cool. I'm really surprised because I go, how does it think like this and know the questions to ask? I still don't know. That's where the magic parts comes in there. And sometimes you can see really interesting off the wall stuff it may say, but for the most part, 90% of that is accurate. And you can hear it say, I found an error and I fixed it, and there it is, Gone with the Wind. And you can see the top 10 on this. So imagine you want to do this and you want to pull up stats for sports and baseball and the World Cup and anything that you've previously done manually that was a pain in the neck. This gives you an idea of the art of the possible. All right, cool. That's my Copilot, an Excel demo. So as I mentioned, there's a add-on for ChatGPT in Excel, or you could just simply go to ChatGPT or Copilot and tell it to create a spreadsheet for you. And you could even maybe upload a CSV file that already has information on there, and you could just tell it that you want to add additional information in that CSV file, and then it builds it all out, and then you can say save it in an Excel file, and then you can do it. So that's another way you can do it. But this way, if you're dealing with semi-structured data, this is just a lot easier than because you're inside the tool. All right. Let me go back to my presentation here. So now let's talk about, this was the example of ChatGPT for Excel. That's what it looks like. And get out of my hidden ones here. So we finished with that. And now we're going to talk about Microsoft Fabric data engines. And that's working on structured data. So again, the semi-structured data is CSV Excel files on there. The structured data is data sitting in products like SQL Database, SQL Server, Oracle on that. And in Fabric, we have lake houses and warehouses on that. Those are rows and tables in relationals. You can think of it as a relational engine on top of relational storage, although that's kind of a gray area nowadays. If you're not familiar with Fabric, you should be, because Microsoft's got everything in Fabric. I sometimes think every product in existence is going to be part of Microsoft Fabric, but right now it's Fabric, which started out as an analytical tool, so things like Data Factory and Power BI and notebooks, Spark notebooks, and then real-time intelligence, all to build analytical solutions, data warehouse-like solutions in there. But then about a year ago, they started adding in OLTP or transactional systems like SQL database and Cosmos DB, and now they announced Postgres, and you can expect more and more products to be incorporated in the Fabric. That's a whole other separate conversations, but everything in Fabric is storing its data in most cases in OneLake in Delta format. And Copilot and Fabric is integrated, and we'll see it working in areas outside of the data fabric on that, where you can ask questions on your data, and those questions could be on Power BI or your databases, and that's for getting answers. Copilot is also integrated to help you, say, write T-SQL, write notebooks on there, and so OneLake is this kind of the universal storage for all different types of data within Fabric, and even data outside of Fabric could be mirrored in or shortcut to it. All that data that's stored in OneLake can be used when you're using Fabric agents. Fabric agents, the idea of them is you're going to use Generative AI. Think of like a Copilot interface, but it doesn't always have to be Copilot, on top of the structured data, so you can ask questions of it. So just like you go to Copilot outside of this or ChatGPT and you ask questions, and it goes and looks at the entire internet and answers it, or you upload a file and it looks at that file to get the answers. This is going to work on the structured data that's sitting in Fabric in those databases on that. So it's a Q&A on your data. And at a high level, it's at the bottom here, that data could be sitting in a lakehouse or warehouse, like I mentioned before, but could also be in semantic models or Event House or MirrorDB. And then there's a lot of other sources that it recently started supporting, even Microsoft Graph on that. So I can have this data agent or this bot ask questions on data that's stored in all of these. So you can argue that it's not just structured data anymore, it's additional things on that, including Azure AI Search, which is unstructured data. So, but we're going to focus today on using it for structured data. And you hear a lot about Microsoft talks about IQ, Work IQ, Fabric IQ. Data Agent is part of Fabric IQ. Think of Fabric IQ as an umbrella name for many products, one of them being data agents. And then this data agent is a bot within Fabric, but I could use it. I can ask questions outside of Fabric. I could ask questions inside of Teams. And I can ask questions inside of M365 or Copilot Studio. So the demo will show you building it and using the data agent inside of Fabric, but you're not limited to that. You can publish it and use it outside of Fabric. The way data agent works end to end is you create the data agent, you tell it what data sources you want to use. You don't have to use everything. Even if you predict a particular warehouse, you can just say, there's only certain tables I want questions to be asked of. You'll then configure it, which is giving it hints to make the answers better, and I'll demo that. And then you'll publish it out, where it can then be used within all those tools that you're showing on the right here. Another way to look at this is it's using the RAG methodology. When you go and ask a question, it's going to use that question and your entire chat history. It's going to grab the table metadata that you selected that you want the questions to be asked of. You're going to have agent instructions or hints, which could include sample queries and answers, sample queries and the T-SQL, I should say. So you're going to pass all the information into the large language model to get an accurate answer, and that just generates T-SQL. it doesn't return, the large language model itself doesn't return the data. It doesn't really understand it. In this case, it doesn't need the data. It just needs the metadata to come up with a really good T-SQL statement. And that T-SQL statement is going to be executed after it returns that from large language model. And it's going to show the T-SQL that the large language model built and then the results on that. And using a RAG methodology is all this stuff sent over in real time. So the big thing to keep in mind is I'm sending over the metadata to the large language model, and it's taking the question and saying, here's the best SQL I think you should use to get the answer to that question, and then executes that on the structured sources that you specify. All right. So let's see questions. We have okay, I feel okay, that's just comments. Okay, cool, thanks. At this time, Fabric supports Lakehouse, Warehouse, Semantic Models, and KQL databases. That's what it's supported at the bottom. Now, some of this you may not see yet because it may be in private preview or public preview. Fortunately, working on Microsoft, I get access to all this stuff. I know, like Azure AI Search, I think that's in public preview, but you want to check, so you may not see all these on here. But if not, they should be soon. Thanks for pointing that out. So let's go right to the demo on here. And I should point out that Data Agent runs on GCP 5.1. Interestingly, they didn't say before what it was using, but I just saw this today that it's using 5.1. And the demo I'm going to be showing is very similar to this end-to-end tutorial. So if you want to do it on your own, you can just follow that along. And I'll make the deck available so you have it. All right, so let's go to my Fabric here. And what we're going to start out doing is we're going to create a data agent. And this is very simple on here. Let me get rid of it. So I've created a workspace called AI Agent Demo. And that link I showed you will talk about how to get this lakehouse created. You can use any one, but this uses AdventureWorks, still around. And so that link, I followed that link and created this lakehouse. And that's what we're going to be that's the structured data that we're going to be used to ask questions on. So it's very simple. I go to new item and I want to create a data agent. And I'll call it VentureWorks. And that's it. To get started. Now it jumps into the data agent where I'm going to go and build it out. And you can see a couple of performance improvements were just added on here. That is here on this runtime. If I click on that, I could go and use some of the preview, which I haven't done because I'm not sure it's going to give me the right answers on there. And then here's where it says now runs on GCP 5.1. So it was interesting that I asked the product group and they wouldn't tell me what it was run on, but now they publicized it, and it's behind. But I can understand because new models come out every other week on there. So Mike's question is, it does run faster on the preview. That's the whole idea. If you click on this, learn more, it goes through and tells you why it's faster and other things that it's done to make it better. But like it's in preview. So like anything in preview, it could have problems or bugs in there. So that's why when I demo, I don't use that. Yeah, so preview is the auto version, but kind of a little wrong. Yeah, right. Good. So I'm jumping into here. Okay, great. Well, what do you want to use? What data? So if I click on this add data and I go to data source on here, I'm going to pull up that AdventureWorks, and chances are you don't want to have all the tables in AdventureWorks on here because maybe you have junk tables or tables are just going to cause more confusion on here. So you can see I have about 30 tables on here. So I'm just going to, and this is in a star schema. So I'm just going to pick 10 of these tables on here. And you have to be really careful that you pick all the tables. Otherwise, you're going to get a wrong answer and not realize it's wrong. Because the problem is, how does an end user go and check and validate that this data is even right on that? They can do the smell test on there, but this is where it gets really interesting. And I have an article that talks about why you still want to use dashboards, because if you need 100% accuracy, you don't want to use GenAI. If it's something that's life or death, or maybe numbers reported to Wall Street, you're going to want to use reports on dashboards, because this could give you wrong answers on there. Now, most times that's probably not a big deal, but always keep that in mind. And I'll pick about 8 of the dimension tables, and then a few of the couple of the fact tables on here. And that's it. Let's see how it works. So I'm going to go and ask it, what is the most sold product on here? So here is the chat. You can have simple questions. And this is now going to go and take the question, take the metadata of the tables I selected, my chat history, and those other things to talk about, and send it all over to large language models, which is going to return the best SQL it thinks to get the correct answer on here. So you can see it thinking, and it returns a water bottle. And if I want to see the SQL it created, I click on here, and you see here's the SQL it created on here. Usually does a pretty good job of it. And this is accurate. Sometimes this didn't used to be accurate, so I had to flip things around, because it used to, until a week ago, would return the answer not on the sales that you can see here, but rather on the oh, wait a minute, I stand corrected. It went back. I did this right before the session. It was returning the right answer, which is not water bottle. So for weeks leading up to this, it came up with the wrong answer, water bottle. Earlier, it came up with the right answer, but now it went back to the wrong answer. And I say it's the wrong answer because it is giving me the top based on the quantity, but I wanted it based on the sales amount. But I didn't specify that in the query. So prompt engineering, I should say, what is the most sold product based on sales? But I didn't do that. But maybe in my company, most people are not going to mention that. They're going to assume it's on sales on that. So I have to fix this, because I don't want other people running it and getting the wrong answer based on quantity on here. And they wouldn't know that it went in quantity unless they dug and saw the SQL. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a hint. So if I go up here to setup, and I go into this agent instructions, I could go in here and say, whenever somebody asks about, whenever somebody asks about the most sold, the metric to use is total sales revenue, not order quantity, like it did. And that's the hint, and that's it. So now I come back here and I rerun this, and now it, fingers crossed, will come up with the right answer on that. So agent instructions are just hints. I can even give it data source instructions. Imagine I have multiple data warehouses in there, or data lake houses in there. I could then tell it, well, if somebody asks a question related to the customer, go to this one. If it's about a product, go to this one. So it's more hints on here. And now it comes up, it's okay. Now it came up with the correct answer, mountain 200 black. If I look at the query, it took my hint and applied it. It used the sales amount instead of the quantity. So the challenge for you as an IT person is you have to go and play around with it and think of all the questions an end user may ask and then give it hints on that. So it's not assuming things on here. So it could take some time and effort to go in here. And as much as you give it hints, it's probably going to still come up with the wrong answers. And because it's non-deterministic, it could give a different answer for the same question, which is what happened to me. It gave a different answer last time I ran it a few hours ago. All right, so let me try another one on here. So I'm going to ask it, what is the average sales amount per order by territory on this? The question in the chat was, can you comment? Yeah, you can put comments in there. I blanked out, I erased all those in there, but you saw originally one in there was just comments. So just follow that guideline on here. So this come up, and I think this is actually right. Now, if we look at the statement here, you'll see it is right, I believe, but it's kind of interjoined. I don't know why it did all that. But let's pretend it didn't come up with the right answer in there, or I just want to make a better select statement on here because this is kind of funky. So I can go to data. So let me go back to instructions here, and I'm sorry, example queries here, and add an example. And I'm going to say, I'm going to take that exact question I was asked here, and here's the, you can use the two dots, two dashes. That's how you put comments in there. And I'm going to come up with the exact right SQL they should use on here. So you can see it's more simpler than what it came up with. And again, that's it. And I could run the queries again, the question again on here. So let me copy that one. And it's important to, and you can see here when it ran, it tested that this was accurate. If it's not, it'll come up with a little error here. And it's important to clear the chat when you put a sample, when you put the query in there. Otherwise, it will have everything in cache, and it will come up with the same answer. So something I learned the hard way. Why is it not coming in with the right answer? And it was, oh, I need to clear the chat. So now the same question, I think it'll come up with the exact same answer in here, but the SQL will look different. So that is another hint that's being passed to the large language model. It'll work even if you don't have the exact same question, but it's close. It will use those SQL to improve the answer, because they could look at that and say, well, it's almost the exact same one. I'm going to use the same SQL and make some modification to it. So here it came back, and it looks like it's the same, but you should see the query is the one I typed in there, right there. And interestingly enough, it decided to come up with a chart, which it's never done before on that. So it must be something they added, because a couple hours ago it didn't come up with the chart on there. And this is something that I think is in public preview, where you can, instead of just having an answer that's a SQL response, you can say, I want you to return this. And so before, that response, you can see, was just this. You can also tell it to say at the end of this, display it in a pie chart or something in there. And that's the graphing capability, something they just added on that. All right, so that's it. That's how easy it is. Now, this is all working within Fabric, but I can make it work outside of Fabric. And to do that, you can publish it. So if I come out here and you want to give it some description, this way it's more likely to use the right data agent if you don't specify which one to use. And I'll go through that more in a minute. And then you publish it, and this is going to come back with a URL you can use. So I can go into a notebook and I could call APIs, pass in that URL, and then it will, and pass a question into it, and then it'll return that into, say, a Spark notebook. And then I can be doing all this within the Spark notebook if I don't want to do it via a user interface on here. I can also, if I share it, and this could send information about what I'm doing in Fabric if I wanted others to use it within Fabric. So you can use that share button for that, but that's strictly sharing it inside of Fabric. If I want to share it outside of Fabric, I'm going to use the publish button. So now that it's published, it's available through that URL, or if I go to Copilot here, this is Copilot within Fabric, but I can also, I failed to show you that. If I go back here, when I published it, this spot right here is I can have it show up in my 365 Copilot agent store if I wanted to on that. And you can also have a draft and a published on here. So if I publish something and then want to go and modify it, I can use a draft and won't overwrite what's already been published. Now that it's published, I could automatically find it within Fabric Copilot by clicking on here and clicking on data agents, and there it is, the one I just created. And now I can ask some other question, such as, what do I want to ask? How many unique customers? Let me put this one in here. Now, if you never played with this Copilot in Fabric, it essentially can ask any question asked will go over everything in Fabric in your tenant. It'll record reports at data agents. The problem with that is it may not know which, in this case, a data agent to use, because I may have published a bunch of them. So to prevent it from getting confused, I specified in that here what data agent to use. It may come back and say, I'm not sure which data agent to use. Here's a couple of them. Which one should I use? It'll do that soon if you Power BI reports and semantic models and stuff on that. So it's just a way of making it more accurate. And here it comes back, and this is accurate. So now I can use Copilot within Fabric. I can use 365. I can publish it out and use it within Teams on there. And that's what most customers do. They have a Teams channel that they publish the data agent to, and you can use it within there. And then, okay, question, is there a token limit? No token limit. Go crazy. Use as much as you want in there. Fabric, if you're not familiar with it, has capacities. And everything you do, including data agents, will use some of that capacity, whether I'm creating Power BI reports or a warehouse, real-time intelligence, or Fabric agent, it's all using the capacity. So it's not so much the tokens, but how much capacity do the tokens use. So that can get a little messy and tricky on there. You can also, so you can create a workspace. So I have this AI agent demo here, and that within the workspace here, it's using a particular capacity right here. And everything I do is using that capacity. And you can have multiple workspaces using one capacity. Generally, people set up a bunch of capacities. That's a long topic, and the best way to do that. You can also set up a capacity that's just used for AI. And a lot of customers take that approach because they want to limit the amount of AI that's going. Because imagine I'm going crazy with a data agent and I'm using all the capacity, and somebody's generating Power BI reports that's using the same capacity suddenly can't do anything because they get these limits, capacity limits reached. So you can say any AI that's done, whether it's a data agent or using Copilot, is going to use a specific capacity set aside just for AI.
And James, just to simplify this, or maybe ask this question in a different way, based on the experience, how much pressure can a data agent put on the capacity? Is it very intense? Is it like, comparable to report? do customers complain that agents can exhaust their capacity? I know it's very difficult to answer that. I'm just curious,
Yeah.
how
Yeah. Well,
intensive they could
you,
be.
yeah. The consulting answer, it depends.
Depends.
The way
Yep,
to
yep.
think about it is not the tokens, but I'm creating a SQL statement and it's running against a structured data. If I have a query that's got to go and do a lot of work to try to come up with the SQL, and then that SQL is going to go and execute, and it's going to take a while to
Right.
run that SQL because maybe it came back inefficient. All that capacity usage is
Okay.
going to eat into your capacity. So what I find is, yeah, AI will use a lot of your capacity, much more than anything else, especially if it's malformed. And that's why Microsoft came out with that separate AI, because a lot of people were complaining at first that AI was overtaking everything.
Would you say that using a semantic model can kind of alleviate a little bit of these concerns if these queries are coming pretty fast?
Yeah, I would say for sure. So, and that's a kind of a best practice is, hey, don't leave it up to the end user to go and select all those tables.
Right.
Create a semantic model, and it's already been selected. So that's a great way to simplify them creating a data agent and also not having selected the wrong tables, because it'll go and it could do some crazy query to try to get it to work because you forgot to select one table. Also keep in mind, I don't tend to see end users or report writers what you create the data agents. That's still mainly by IT, who's going to be a lot more better, I'll say, at creating a proper model and using it. So think of it, you may have at your company the data agent creators. That'll be much different people than the one that are writing reports or building a semantic models on there.
Right.
But the problem is it's an all or nothing with Fabric, where you can go in there and you turn it on for your company, and everybody can start building data agents. Now, I will say that's problem is going to be solved soon. Microsoft announced in private preview Fabric policies. So finally, you can go in there and say, I don't want anybody to create Fabric agents except these two people, or people in this workspace, or people using this capacity. So they're going to put a lot of guardrails to be able to put on Fabric to prevent people from going crazy and taking up all the capacity by creating Fabric agents or running something in a Spark notebook. All right, cool. Thanks. Some really good clarifying questions. And tokens, I was just talking about this today with the customer. It's a challenge now because tokens can cost a lot. And honestly, this is where the payoff is. Microsoft's spending all this money in data centers because they want people using tokens on there. So yeah, everybody's going crazy with tokens until they get the build, and they go like, oh, we can't have everybody going and using Copilot and generating these tokens on there. So there are methods they can build, things they can do behind the scenes to limit that. Maybe they create their own large language model that's local, and that things use that instead of going out and using the one in Azure. So that's a whole other conversation, but be very aware that your tokens can go crazy. Within Fabric, it's the capacity used by the tokens. Outside of Fabric, like using Foundry or something, it's the number of token calls that are going to be expensive. But either way, the cost can add up quickly. All right. So let's jump to the deck again. And I mentioned that a new feature in public previews, you can use data agent on unstructured data. That's a whole other demo. But you can now combine unstructured search and the structured on there. And a lot of people ask what's the difference between data agent and Copilot, because Copilot is existing within Fabric. And because people ask me, why can't I just use Copilot and that you saw in the top left and just ask questions on a report? Yeah, you can do that, but you can't configure Copilot. Where a data agent you can. As you saw, I gave it hints and sample SQL. You can't do that with Copilot. So one big advantage of data agent is the customization of it. The other is, think of Copilot within Fabric as helping you do your work. You can ask it to help me generate a better T-SQL or code in a Spark notebook on here. And a data agent is very different. It's completely independent of Fabric in there, and you can use it to answer questions that are unrelated to building a solution, where Copilot and Fabric in a lot of spots is helping you build a solution in there. And the last one is Copilot. If you're using it, say, within Power BI, it only knows about the report and the semantic model that you're using that's on displayed on the screen. So you can ask questions of that. You can expand on that report. You can say create another tab and put a graph on there, but it doesn't know anything outside of that what it sees on the screen in there. Where data agents is the ability to ask ad hoc questions on any data that you specify from those tables. So you don't have to have a report or semantic model created. You can go to the lowest level table on that. And that's the whole idea of why it's much more advanced than what you see in Copilot. All right, a couple of industry use cases here. This is where you can combine the structured and unstructured data on here. So I think I have it, where do I put it? Here. So I could ask a question and I can have that question be sent over to a data agent that's sitting in a application or a Spark notebook, where it returns the SQL, and it runs that SQL and gets the data from that answer to that SQL. And that passes the data. So we're going one step further. We're not just running a SQL and seeing the data. We're taking that data that it returned and then passing it into a large language model to ask another to get answers on that. So it's a kind of an extra step that you're going through, where you're making the return data useful. Not only the return data on a structured database, but I can also use a vector database, like I mentioned before, and use that on unstructured data sitting in documents. I could use it on, say, a CSV file, and then pass all those resulting data into a large language model. Maybe I want to say, help me find some fraudulent charges, and I have Word documents, PDF documents, CSV files, and data sitting in a structured database, that I also want to pass all that data into a large language model to say, see if you can find some fraud. So that's using all three of them. And that's where, if you think of the use cases, here is, imagine I'm in healthcare and I have a bunch of doctor's notes that's on PDF and they're crazy writing, and I have unstructured data sitting in lab reports. But I also have patient data sitting in structured data. They could be medications, demographics, treatments, and I want to use all that to come up with the best care for a patient. And that's using the best of everything on there. I'm not limiting to just lab reports or PDF documents. I'm using all this data and combining it all to get a much more accurate answer. This is where we're headed. Previously, it was just mostly unstructured data. I can upload all the lab reports, but you know what? I got a bunch of helpful stuff sitting in relational databases. Now I can integrate that too with the data agent. Think of it for marketing. I want to target people and be more accurate with who I'm targeting to get more likely they're going to buy something from my company. So let me take all this unstructured data about people. I'm going to go and find maybe surveys they've taken and feedback they've given that's sitting in Word or PDF documents. I'm going to go out and scan the social media of people. And if you don't think they're doing it, think again. They're going to find all your social media, which is unstructured data, and then combine it with this your personal history of purchases. And I'm going to target it, because maybe I will find out through social media you already bought something that I'm trying to target. So why bother sending you any emails or whatnot in there? So this is putting all this all together. This was a pipe dream a few years ago. Now this customers are building this. They're integrating all this type of data. And because the World Cup game is starting in 6 minutes, think of of as I'm a coach and I want to choose the best lineup for USA to beat Belgium, and I have data that's sitting in videos in there, and because now it can analyze videos. I was surprised when I learned about that a few months ago. You can upload a video to Copilot, and it'll go and analyze the video. Maybe I have player formations and lineups that I want to upload in there. Maybe I have PDF documents that talks about coaching, scouting information on there. Maybe I will have a lot of stuff sitting in a structured database that talks about their fitness levels. I can put all that into it for about my team and about the opposing team, and ask the large language model, what lineup should I use? What formation should I use? Which player should I use? This is some clubs are doing this stuff already on there, and it's amazing on that. How accurate it is, how good it is, very subjective, but at least it's going to give coaches a better starting point and things to think about that they may not have thought about on that. One day you may even see, I don't know if they'll ever allow it, but imagine you can take all this structured data and video of the first half, and during halftime you can go in there and make adjustments based on all the information you're pulling in and sending to the large language model. All right. So Mike says, yeah, can handle more 10 minutes. Right. So good point on that. It's limited, and it's going to be very expensive if you upload a video and you ask it to analyze it. And then if you ask it for create a video, right now it can only create a few seconds or maybe a minute or so of that. So you'll hit these limits. But I think back to a couple of years ago, it wouldn't even let you upload CSV files, and then they would let you upload them, but they can only be small, and then they made them bigger and bigger. Now they have bigger limits in there, and I have a slide in there somewhere that compares all the limits on there. But because a lot of the LLMs and other models are getting cheaper, they're making those limits higher. All right, I think that was, yeah. So in closing, some helpful blogs. Definitely want to see the one about GenAI dashboards I talked about before, because you don't want to use GenAI for everything. You're still a big need for dashboards on there. And then I mentioned, if you want a free copy of my book, if I was there and we were all in person, I would have brought a whole stack of them, like Bob Ward does, and sign them and give them out. But that's pretty expensive too. But in the alternative is, if you want a PDF version, just go scan the QR code or go to /freebook. And all I ask in return, it would be great if you can give a review on Amazon after you read it. Good or bad, just put a review out there. All right. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to just go and send me an email. I'll be happy to answer it.
James, this was great. Thank you so much. Let's not hold you anymore. I hope you join us again in future. And this was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, glad to be part of it. Thanks, everyone. And let's, I'm assuming most people are rooting for USA, so let's hope that they can pull out a great victory.
We hope so.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Enjoy the game. Bye.
All right. Thanks, all.
Take care.